It's often the case when you start a new hobby, your first attempt isn't going to be your best work, but the first time you try something new, it's the most important part of the journey, because a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. I'm going to show you the basics of using Blender, which will allow you to take that first valuable step into the world of 3D modelling. We'll start with the most important step of all. Once you've opened Blender, save your file. Ensure that you're saving all the time. Just press Ctrl S frequently because Blender can crash and it's heartbreaking to lose all of your work. So we'll start with navigating around your scene. Clicking and holding the middle mouse button will allow you to rotate the camera. Shift plus clicking the middle mouse button will allow you to pan around the scene, and the scroll wheel will allow you to zoom in and out. You can use the numeric keypad on your keyboard to align the view to different orthographic views. Pressing 1 will align the view to the front, 3 to the side and 7 to the top. Holding Ctrl with these keys will swap to the opposite direction. For example, Ctrl 1 would be the rear view. There's multiple modes which you can switch between, but we're only going to use two modes today, Object and Edit mode. You can switch between these two modes quickly by simply pressing the Tab key. You can view your current mode here, and you can use this drop down to change the mode. I would recommend using the shortcuts for speed. The majority of the work will be done in Edit mode, so let's switch to Edit mode with the Tab key. Within Edit mode there are three different types of selection modes, Vertex, Edge and Face. Pressing 1, 2 and 3 on the numbers along the top of your keyboard will change these modes respectively. Vertex mode allows you to select individual points which are shown with these dots. Edge selection mode allows you to select the lines connected to vertex. And finally, Face select mode allows you to select a full surface, which is any 3 or more connected edges. You can select everything by pressing the A key and deselect everything by pressing Alt and A. Now let's start in object mode. Click the default cube to select it and press the delete key to get rid of it. This is the 3D cursor. If it's not in the center of the grid, press Shift and C to recenter it. Now we have a blank canvas. With your mouse hovering over the viewport, press Shift and A, and this will bring up the Add menu. Then come to Mesh, then Cube. This will add a fresh cube to the scene at the 3D cursor. The orange dot in the middle of the object is known as the origin, and this is usually found at the center of the volume of the object. And this is what aligns with the 3D cursor. So we're going to start to block out our shape, and I like to do this in orthographic side view. We can move objects around by pressing G for grab and moving them around in the viewport. You can constrain movement to particular axis by pressing the corresponding letter, so we can constrain to the Z axis by pressing Z. If I wanted to move this around and constrain it to the X and Y axis at the same time, what I'd do is I'd press Shift and Z, and this will constrain it to the X and Y axis. You can use these constraints on most, if not all, translation operations. So back in side view, press G and then Z, and then move the cube up a little. You can press Ctrl to activate grid snapping if you wish. Next press Shift and D, and this will duplicate the selected cube and move it forward on the Y axis. Then we're going to use S to scale this down. You can use the numeric keypad to actually specify a size. So if we type 0.5, it will make the cube 50% of its original size. And then we just click to commit that. You can use the numeric input on translations on other operations as well. So I want to make this head a little bit longer, so I'm going to scale this with S on the Z axis, just to make it a little bit larger. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go into the bottom view with Ctrl and 7, and then we're going to duplicate the head with Shift and D. And we can put this in the rough position of where the leg might be. Let's come into side view, and then we can grab it down on the Z axis. It's a little bit chunky, so we're going to scale this on the X and Y axis. So scale, Shift Z, and scale it down a little. To save us doing this 4 times for each leg, what we're going to do is we're going to add a modifier. So come to this blue spanner and add Generate Mirror. And then we click on this Mirror Object eyedropper and click on this big cube in the middle. So that adds us legs across each side. And one more thing we can do is we can click on this Y axis and it will create the back legs. And now we can grab and move as needed. That looks good. So what we need to do now is select all these objects. We can either do a box select or we can shift click on all of the objects. Then what we want to do is press Ctrl and number 2 on the numbers on the top of your keyboard. And this will add a subdivision surface modifier. This modifier kind of smooths things out a little bit, but it doesn't actually change any of the geometry. If you click on the body and then come into edit mode, you can see the original cube is still here. If you don't like that, you can click this on cage option here and the cube will conform to the new geometry. Now ultimately that's made the objects a little bit smaller, so things aren't quite where we want them to be. So let's shift them around a little bit. That's looking a little bit better. So let's add a little bit more detail. Let's select the body, come into edit mode, and we're going to hover over the cube and press Ctrl R. What we're looking for is this horizontal yellow line. You will see it here, but we're looking for the horizontal one. This is a loop cut. So we click that and it'll turn into an orange line. And all we need to do is just drag this down a little. We don't want it too far, we don't want it like this. We just want it about maybe here. And that changes the shape of the body. Now again, the legs aren't in the best place, but we'll leave them where they are for just a minute. Now let's edit the head. So let's come into edit mode. We're going to go into face select mode, select the top face, and then press S to scale. And we're just going to make that a little bit smaller. And what we're going to do is do exactly the same that we did with the body and create a loop cut. Just going to bring that down to, in fact, let's right click to leave that directly in the middle. And I think that gives us a nice shape. And now we just repeat this process for the legs. Come into edit mode, add a loop cut, and then drag it down. Drag this one down a little bit more because this is going to be the feet, and the further down the flatter the surface is going to be. But we don't want it all the way down to the bottom. So let's maybe put it about there. And so you see the problem we had earlier has disappeared. So we can start to add some smaller details now. So let's go back into edit mode for the head and select the face. Press Shift S and do cursor to selected. And this will move the 3D cursor to that top face. Come back into object mode and then press Shift and A and add a cube. And the cube is absolutely huge, so let's scale this down. So we press S to scale and we bring that to about there perhaps. And then go into edit mode and we're going to add a loop cut. This time we're not doing it across the horizontal, we're doing this on the vertical. Click to commit and then in face select mode, select this face here and then press delete, then vertices. And this will delete half of the cube. What we want to do next is add a modifier, generate, mirror. And on this time, we're not clicking on mirror object, but we're clicking on clipping instead. And this just makes sure that the vertices don't pass over to the opposite side. Now in edit mode, face select, we can grab this face here, G to grab, and X to constrain. And we're just going to move this out to about here. Now we can come and find the shear tool in the tool panel. If this panel isn't showing, press T and it'll open it up for you. Now in front view, we'll see this yellow handle here, the one at the top. Grab this and just move it and press 1 on the numbers at the top. Next we're going to extrude this face down, so press E to extrude, and initially it comes out in this direction. We don't want this, we want it coming down on the Z axis, so press Z again, it unlocks it, press Z one more time and it'll constrain it on that Z axis. Now these horns are pointing the wrong way, so first of all let's take the green one at the side and we're going to rotate this, and what we can do is we can actually press the number 2. Next, these are kind of upside down, so what we want to do is come up to the top here and we see this transformation pivot point. Click on 3D cursor and then we press A to select everything. We're going to R to rotate and then we're going to press X and we're going to type on the numeric keyboard 180 degrees, and this will rotate this everything 180 degrees around this pivot point. So we've got some nice horns there, and if we press Ctrl 2 it'll add a subdivision surface modifier, and we can just G and Z grab this and move it down into the head just wherever you want the horns to be, just like that. What we can do now is add some eyes. So we want to position the 3D cursor at the point where we want the eyes to be. Think about where you want the eyes to be on your model and then shift and right click on that point, and that'll move the 3D cursor to that point. Then you need to add a UV sphere. You do this very similar to the way that you add a cube. Shift A, mesh, UV sphere. This is absolutely huge, we don't want it this big, so let's S to scale and move it right down to about there perhaps. That looks a good size. Now we're going to add a mirror modifier just like we did with the legs, but we're not going to do this on the y-axis. When we look from above, the eyes are probably bulging out a little bit too much, so let's grab them and then just move them just slightly inside the mesh a little bit more. Okay, so next what we can do is we can select everything and right click and shade smooth, and this smooths everything out. But what we can see here is we still have some hard edges, and that's fine, we can deal with this. What we want to do is select all of the objects that have got a subdivision surface modifier on them. So in this case it's everything except the eyeballs. So click the legs, shift click the body, shift click the head, and shift click the horns. And now we can see we've got this subdivision surface modifier there, and we have the number 2 here and the number 2 here. So this is how detailed it is in the viewport, this is how detailed it is in the render. So generally speaking, you want to up it in the render and not necessarily in the viewport, but this is a really small scene, and if your computer's half decent, it should be able to cope with it no problem. What we're going to do is going to press the Alt key, because Alt means it's going to apply this to all of the selected objects, and then we're going to click and drag to highlight both of those fields there, and then we're going to type in the number 4 and then press enter, and that will apply a higher level of subdivision to all of the objects selected. And we can see now we aren't seeing those harsh lines. Now let's add a little bit of colour. So first things first, we need to come across into a different shading mode. So if we come to the icons at the top and change to material preview, this will give us a better idea of what things are going to look like. And we'll start by doing the eyes. So let's click the eyes. We'll come to this material tab here and click new. And we can just rename this to eyes. And I like to make things just jet black and change the roughness to 0, and that gives us some nice reflexive eyeballs. We're going to do a similar process for the horns. So new, horns, and change the base colour to maybe a pinkish kind of colour. And in this case we're going to change the roughness to 1. And now we can do the main skin of the cow. So click on the body, click new, and we'll call this skin. We'll change the roughness to 1, and we'll change the base colour to maybe like this. Now because we've already made this material, we can apply it to these other 2 white objects here. So if we click on the face, we don't need to click new, we just click on the drop down, click skin, click on the legs, click on the drop down, click skin. Now they all share a material, so if you make a change to the material, it affects everything. There we go. So it's a little bit plain, we can add a little bit more detail. So what we're going to do is we're going to click back on the head, we're going to come into edit mode, and let's come into face select mode, select the bottom face, and then we're going to press Control and the plus button on your numeric keyboard. And that's going to just extend that selection up by 1 face step. Now if we come back to the material, we click on the plus button here, and this adds a new material slot. We press the assign button, and it assigns this material slot to these faces. And then we can click new, and we can select a different colour. So we can actually change this in object mode as well. So if we come into object mode for a better look, and we can adjust it as we wish. And I think that's probably good. And we're going to do the same thing on the legs. Go into edit mode, select the bottom face, Control and plus, add a new material slot, assign it, and go to the drop down and select other material. So there we go. So if we want to move our creature, we need to select everything and press G and move it around. But that can be a little bit fiddly sometimes. So ideally we want to be grabbing this object, moving this, and everything moves with it. So what we can do here is we can click on the legs and then shift click on the body and then Control P and then object. And then we're going to do the same thing with the eyes and the horns to the face. Control P, object. And then finally we're going to take the head, shift click on the body, and Control P, object. So we've parented the legs to the body, the horns and the eyes to the face, and the face to the body. So now when we grab this single object, the whole thing moves with us. And currently our creature is a little bit large. If we press N to come into the properties, we can see that the scale of this is actually about 2 meters tall, and that's huge. It's a massive creature, and I prefer my creatures a little bit smaller. So if we press Shift and C to recenter the cursor to the world origin, and with 3D cursor still selected in the transformation pivot point, we can just scale this down by 0.1, and this will bring us to about 20 centimeters in height, which is much nicer. Now we can select everything and press Control A to apply, and I'm going to apply the scale. So now this is its default scale. Okay, so let's select our entire creature, and we're going to press M for move, and we're going to move this to a new collection. So click on new collection, and we'll just call this creature. Hit OK, and this puts it in its own separate little collection. It just makes things a little bit tidier. So let's click on the collection, and press Shift and A, Mesh Plane. And this creates a solid surface. Let's go into edit mode. Now we probably don't want these transformation controls on the screen at all points, so let's just click on this select box up here, just because it looks nicer, it's easier to use and it doesn't clutter the screen. Press number 2 to come into edge select mode. Select this back edge here, and then we're going to do E, and then we're going to do Z. We'll move this up 2. There we go. And if we select this edge and then Control B for bevel, and then use the mouse scroll wheel to add some cuts and just make a nice gradual kind of curve there. Come back into object mode, right click and shade smooth. So let's line up the camera now. So let's come into front view to begin with, and then just rotate the camera so that it's kind of like a nice sort of perspective. And then we come to view, align active camera to view. And this will move our camera into the position which is in line with the viewport. Now we come into the properties panel. That's N to open the properties panel. Come to view and then camera to view. And now this will allow us to move the camera around just like we move around the viewport. And it'll allow us to very precisely align the camera. Now don't worry about the backdrop if it doesn't fall into place. We'll deal with that in a few minutes. But just get the angle that you're looking for. So we can zoom in and out using the mouse scroll wheel. Shift and click to drag it around, and middle mouse click to rotate. So let's say there's a good spot, and let's untick this just so that we don't accidentally move the camera. Let's select our plane, and we're just going to do S for scale, X, and let's just increase this to about there. So you've probably got a point light in your scene which looks a little bit like this, and if you were to come into rendered view, your scene would look a little bit like this. And while that's not terrible, it's also not too great either. So let's actually just delete this. Just press delete, get rid of that light. Everything's very dark. What we're going to do is we're going to add some environment light. So if you come across to this little world icon here, and where it says color, there's like a grey box. If you click on this little yellow dot here, it'll open up this menu. And you want to actually click on sky texture. And this will add like a sun to the environment. And what we can do is we can change the elevation and the rotation. So I'm going to change the elevation to 3 degrees, and then the rotation, I'm just going to move it around like about minus 105, and this gives us a really nice kind of sunrise kind of feel. So now it's starting to look quite nice. Now what I want to do is tweak the camera settings a little bit. So click on the camera. You can either do this in the viewport, just like this, or in the hierarchy, just like this. And then click on this camera icon just down here. And what we're going to do is we're going to tick this depth of field tick box. And then the focus object, we use the eyedropper, and we're going to find the face. I'm going to click on the face. And then what I want to do is I want to change the focal length to 85 millimeters. And then I'm just going to click on the camera to view and just scroll out just a little bit more and untick that. So now what we can do is we can take this cube, which is our creature, and we can rename that if we want, just to make it a little bit more memorable. We can call that body perhaps. Now if we right click on this in the hierarchy and select the hierarchy, it selects all the objects. We can press Shift and D to duplicate this just like we did earlier. And then we can press, while it's still on our cursor, press Shift and Z, and this will slide it around on this plane. So let's put it there perhaps, and then we'll do Shift and D again, and then Shift and Z, and let's make another one, and put it about here. Now, you probably noticed it disappeared just a moment ago, so this is just because it's gone through the plane in the background. So if you wanted this object here, then what you could actually do is you could click on the plane and then G, Y, and then move it backwards. Now you want to ideally move it so the shadows are falling just on the flat surface. Now what we can see here is the front of this plane is now being cut off. So press tab to go into edit mode, press 2 to go into edge select mode, select this front edge here so it's white, and then G and then Y, and then just grab this and move it, and just move it so it's not showing in the camera view. Then you can come back into object mode, and then it's just a case of positioning your objects exactly where you want them to be. So I'm going to put this here, I'm going to put this here, and then I'm just going to rotate this on the Z axis. But before I do, I want to change this to median point. So this will actually rotate around this dot as opposed to the 3D cursor. So R, Z, change that, and then R, Z, and rotate that. And now it's up to you to just position your scene exactly how you want it. I'm going to change this to actually a square. So I'm going to come up to the output tab here, and I'm going to change the Y dimensions to 1920 also. And this will give me a nice square to work with. I'm just going to adjust slightly and zoom in ever so slightly. If you want a greater depth of field, you can actually just click on your camera, and instead of moving the camera, you can change this to say 100 for example. It'll zoom in a little bit more and you'll get a greater depth of field. So there we go. Now all you need to do next is, and I do encourage saving at this point before you render anything, press save. You should have been saving constantly throughout, but if you haven't, now is the best time to do it. Press F12 and it'll render this. So you should get a new window which pops open, which will show you the rendering of your image. And the speed depends on your PC and how fast or slow it might be, and whether you're using a GPU or a CPU. So once you've got your final image, you just come to Image, Save As, and then find somewhere on your hard drive where you want to save it. Pop it on your desktop, and then you're free to upload that to all of your socials. Now, I'd probably say that if you have never done any 3D modeling and you create something that is similar to this, then you should be very proud of yourself. This is a really simple object and it's really nice. I'm going to post this on my socials because I really like this. I think it just looks pleasing. It's not overly complicated, but I like it. And so if yours is looking something like this, then you should be proud of it. Now please feel free to join my Discord and share any works that you've created. Feel free to change things, add things, different colours, different perspectives, even a different creature. Find the link to my Discord in the description and let me see what you've done. If you've enjoyed this and you want to learn more, then maybe consider subscribing, because I try and post tips and tutorials as often as I think of them. So if you subscribe, then you're more likely to see those. And if you've enjoyed and found this useful, give me a thumbs up so that I know that's a good tutorial. If it's naff, give me a thumbs down, but leave me a comment to tell me why it's crap. So yeah, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you in the next one.